If we destroy the rainforest, we destroy ourselves. People need to get that.
People are so proud. Wow, I have a Tesla. So what?
And
it's just ridiculous. Our priorities are really, really screwed up. Products don't reflect their true cost.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Compassiviste Dialogues. I have Robert Rubinstein of TJE1 Group today. And we're going to talk about some interesting things and bring out some facts and some hypocrisy issues about the sustainability and climate discussions that have fired up around the world now. So without further ado, let's find out who Robert is for those who have been hiding behind a rock for the last 30 years. Robert, tell us about yourself.
Hi, thanks a lot, Ali, for organizing this. So most people know TJE1 mainly from the international summit that we held over the last 25 years on sustainable finance, about 40 times in Europe, Asia, Latin America, North America. But our work was never really to be a conference organizer. The work was always to change the financial system so it worked for all stakeholders by educating asset owners and managers. And because the financial sector, as you know, is just a predictable group of alpha males who kind of all run up the hill and off the cliff at the same time, behavioral change was never really challenged. So we did that, and we built up a big network of 60,000 readers that get the TJE1 Weekly, and about 20,000 of those are investment allocators. And we tried many other ways of getting buy-in through retreats, learning journeys, investor salons, online masterclasses, summits, virtual and face-to-face. So everything that helped build capacity. And from that led us to, we saw the greatest need is connecting impactful, purpose-driven companies and funds with investors. So we built a kind of Tinder for impact investing, different type of happy ending. And we've been using that to find investment for these companies and these funds. So we're still doing the regular outreach and capacity building through virtual platform. And a lot of the work is just raising money. I was shocked when I saw the statistic that there's, according to Credit Suisse, which doesn't exist anymore, but before they went bankrupt, they publish every year a wealth report, and they said there's 4.7, I think it's 4.8 now, times more wealth than there is global GDP. That's absolutely incredible. So there's no shortage of money to resolve almost all of the issues that we have. We can create an economy based on well-being where people have a living wage and where people have decent health care and a livable home and food to eat, etc. So the money's there. It's just a question of will and understanding. And people still seem to be obsessed with the idea that dying rich is a great accomplishment. You're still dead.
Yes, and dying rich is something that we aspire to in the capitalist order. And like you rightfully said, it's not time anymore to make little reforms and regulation adjustments. It's time for a radical change in the sense of we need to change our mindsets. And so the whole sustainability issue really becomes grander than an economic issue. It becomes a sort of a socio-spiritual issue where, like you said, you need to change essentially the way you look at things. You need to change your values so that you can make an actual change in the way you invest. And we spoke about this on your show earlier, a few weeks ago, I remember, and we came upon the same topic. And I said, there isn't a shortage of money. as I was noticing it without knowing about the report. I could feel it because there was a lot of money being thrown around. But the
Yeah.
thing is, there was a shortage of smart money, intelligent money.
Yeah.
And when I say smart and intelligent, I don't mean IQ levels or people holding master's degrees or MBAs, but I'm talking about people who are intelligent enough to know, as you say, where to put the money to make effective changes, so we can divert from the trajectory of, the imminent extinction that we're facing, in a sense. And that is a spiritual issue. So now you bring that up, and it becomes a duality, because the way this issue is raised in the developed world versus the developing world is a very different concept. I want you to start with your vision of how the developed world can come into itself in terms of the infrastructure of nations or of regions like the EU or North America to impact sustainability.
I mean, it's very easy, except that the political will to do it is not there. I mean, you only have to look at the most simple concept to grasp for anyone listening. If you buy products, don't reflect their true costs, their true societal or environmental impact. And the best example is bicycles in the airline industry. So a bicycle, on average, it might be different in the UK, in that is between 21 and 25% sales tax throughout the EU. The US is probably a bit lower because each state has their own rules. But if you buy an airline ticket, which is much more environmentally destructive, there's no sales tax at all, zero. It's a global agreement started after World War II, so people can be more together to hopefully avoid future wars. But that is not relevant at the moment. And the same thing, kerosene has no taxes on it either for jet fuel. So if you're willing to subsidize at that level, I mean, you can just calculate. Imagine if we're charging 21% sales tax on airline tickets and 21 or 25% or gasoline taxes on kerosene. Whoa, you'd see big difference. We wouldn't have that many people flying. Is that so horrible? So as long as policymakers refuse to say, Ali, I'm sorry, it's not your right to travel with Ryanair for $10 to Barcelona. And by the way, vote for me. I understand the political issues there, but unless you start dealing with that, if prices really reflect their true cost, everything will fall into place. Companies will adapt, investors will adapt, because it's a level playing field. But as long as you're not willing to do that, then you'll have artificial, growth, but you'll have continued more and more poverty with more and more wealth concentration, because it's not that the wealthy are brilliant. Sorry to say, most of the people that I've met that are incredibly wealthy are not that brilliant. They're just lucky because they're sitting on cash, and everybody who has a de-risked deal brings them the deals, and they can execute on them. So the gold is delivered in their living room without them getting up off of the couch. So that there will be more and more wealth concentration. And as long as there's not going to be, a wealth tax or even a basic minimum tax for individuals, you're going to have continuous problem, and the wealth concentration is just going to get worse and worse and worse. I mean, when you get like 5 billion or 10 billion or 20 billion or 100 or 2, I mean, how many more toilets do you need? How many more shoes is that's going to give you fulfillment? It's interesting that there's a TV show called Succession, which was very popular. And Brian Cox now is doing a documentary of how the wealth live, the billionaires, and he's interviewing them. And he comes from a poor family, and they're so out of touch often with reality. And they'll fight to the death not to pay taxes. And unless we really start to address this, the solutions are very simple, but you have to have the leadership to execute on that. Just make products reflect their true cost. CO2 intensive. There's a start happening, that a border tax for carbon intensive industry. These are not difficult solutions. The problem is that the lobbyists who have something to lose short term keep blocking it, and governments want, politicians want to stay in power. But until they really address that, products reflecting the true cost, and a tax and a proper tax, particularly a wealth tax, things are only going to get worse. And unfortunately, you saw it with the war in Ukraine, that before the war in Ukraine, people were just, comfortable, it's live, there's no inflation and this. And the minute the war in Ukraine, all of a sudden energy prices shot through the roof, and Europe was able to reduce energy use by a third because prices started to become expensive. And we put on a sweater, not that many. I think more people died from the heat than died from the cold during the war. So I was glad that, not that there was a war, but that products were starting to reflect the true costs, and we should be much more efficient with our resources. But people still believe that sustainability, climate is a sacrifice. We have to sacrifice something. And I prefer to use the word, it's about resilience. It's making you more resilient on many, many levels, emotionally, socially, philosophically, physically, whether you're a company or you're a student. And we have to show a lot more kind of compassion for people. I'm shocked. I grew up in the United States. The lack of compassion there has reached epic proportions, where people will listen to continuous lies, and you have to suffer while I party. So it's very disturbing, but it can be turned around. It's not really that hard, being generous or helpful. The hard part is getting the politicians to get their act together and make the policy changes that are needed. There is no reason why a private equity fund manager should be taxed so low on their carry. Come on, is their job much more challenging than a kindergarten teacher who is forming the minds of the future generations? It's not, and they just like to show, Ali, you don't understand finance. It's complex. Mm-hmm. No, it's not. You just want to end up with more than you started. And most are just used car salesmen with Rolodexes, pretending to be brilliant. And most of the time, they're wrong. So, and most are overpaid. So we need to have a different look and not accept, the status quo, because it can be so much better for everyone. And the wealthy will not suffer that much if they start paying their fair share. They'll still have lots of billions to buy more Ferraris.
Fair enough. And I'm going to deconstruct this from a different perspective so we can have some understanding of what you're saying. Now, imagine this is the case in the world today. The political sphere, the elected officials, essentially work for the corporations that lead the capitalist order. So everybody seems to agree on that. I haven't really faced a lot of adversity when I say this to people. And so, and their terms are pretty short. I mean, from ideation to delivering the keys to buyers of a housing project takes longer than any electorate government in the democratic developed world today. So you can imagine how short their stays are. And during that stay, and to get reelected possibly, they need to appease that group of ownership, essentially. Mm-hmm. So I don't blame the politician who says, I've worked hard in the sense of I went to the right school, lived the right lifestyle, did all the right things to be here, and today earn my bribery, for example, and walk out of this and retire, some place that I've really wished to. So that's all fine because we live in a system where we've developed it to be this way, and we accept it as people. Now, the corporations turn around and say, well, as long as nobody is, attacking me, why should I care? And the problem is we've been provided media to attack without any consequence. So, Twitter and all these other places, people are posting Nestle's an evil company. Why? Because they manufacture plastic and they bottle water in it. Well, don't buy it. Don't buy it.
Exactly.
Don't blame Nestle for then electing an official when you are funding. You work at Nestle, you come home, you go to Walmart, and you buy Nestle, and then you say Nestle's bad. Don't earn from them, and don't go to work for them, and don't buy their products. And let me see how Nestle is so quickly, within maybe 3 months, within one quarterly
Exactly.
report, they will change to glass bottles. They will change to sustainable, eco-recycled glass. So. It's very simple to change, but trying to make this change from that, colloquially called 1% of the rich is going to be impossible. And I say this because I lived in that circle. I lived that life. I gave it all up and I transformed myself to where I am today. I went through something that, possibly any other addiction rehabilitation would require. I went through so much just difficulty to get to this stage that I am right now and to understand the things that you're saying. But I believe that the majority of the people you are speaking of are just so tied into a system that it becomes very difficult to overhaul the system. Today I saw an article through you, thank you, about the 100 companies that create 71% of our carbon emissions. So, and if you go into that list, it's really maybe 10 companies that create half. So the others are just marginal add-ups. So if we look at that, I mean, how hard is it to just shut down 10 companies? Not that hard. What's going to happen to the workforce? They'll find work other places. There's like you said, there's a lot of wealth to go around. The wealth of these companies can be replaced to other spaces. But the thing is, like you said, you call it the politics of it. I say we don't have a democracy to have politics. We don't have the democracy to have political say. For politics to play a part, people need to have equal voice in the dialogue. And there is no equal voice today. We don't elect the officials that we vote for. It's just not worked that way, neither in the US nor anywhere in the world. So that being the case, is it worth bickering and fighting and protesting a system when the power is ours? It is so simple to, instead of fighting that group of people and telling them they need to make a change, or the government to tax them when they wouldn't dare tax their owner, the hand that feeds. And so is it not that much easier to say, let's unite and let's use sanctions and the same systems and boycotts and other variant systems to create a revolution, essentially, a spiritual revolution? Is that not a more effective way when you are facing extinction? I mean, this isn't a space where we have 500 years to test out different policies and try to elect a different government and try to make these changes slowly over time and try to say to a company like BP or Aramco, you need to make gradual changes over the next 2 centuries to reach these specific levels. We don't have that kind of time or luxury. So in a moment where we need radical change, is it really worth the discussion to ask these people and their workers, the UN and other facilities that they've created, to essentially redesign their booklets of nice acronyms and these ESGs and DSGs and all these other things, and all these fun Davos meetings and everything, instead to something workable? Or is it worth saying we are revolting and we are protesting, and if we're going to die, everybody's going to die with us?
I agree that getting angry as the movie from Network, I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore. I agree that people need to protest, but what I'm always surprised at is that when I look at the Koch brothers in the US that have done probably more damage than Rupert Murdoch with Fox News, very little consumer backlash on any of their consumer products. And they make a lot of different consumer products. And nearly nothing in brand destruction that they've experienced. And they just kept on pouring more and more money. So I agree, if you can get consumers to say, I'm not going to buy this, anymore, or I will not support this, or I will not have my investment money going into that, or I will not, use airlines with trains, or whatever. All of that is fantastic, but I just think we have to do every single possibility, because we are running out of runway. You see it already, that they're already, all the scientists are freaking out. Hey, what the hell is going on? It's really changing too fast. You've been shouting at this for a long time. So finally now it's all coming together, and we're still, let's open up more oil and gas fields because I need to get reelected. But I don't see, other than a small group, tremendous consumer or citizen outcry. I see a little bit. I mean, I think the best example was during the financial crisis. When the financial crisis hit, what actually happened, which always shocked me? Basically, I came to your house, Ali, I burnt it down, and then I said, don't worry, Ali, I'm going to lend you more money to rebuild. That's what happened. The financial sector, the banks burnt it down. Don't worry, you're going to borrow money from the market to bail me out to build it up again. There was no political outcry whatsoever. There was no really, what the hell is this? Why are we giving these money? Let's give, attach strings to it. So I don't see, I'm afraid that unfortunately, unless the pain is great enough, I don't see a large outcry, either from the movers and shakers, the politicians, the money people, or even consumers. And until now, I think the attitude is, oh, well, it's an island in the South Pacific. So what? I'm okay. I'm on the third floor. So they're going to disappear.
Right. And I'm going to use that as point one of the hypocrisies that I want to pull out of this talk. And that is that we are hypocritical as consumers in the developed world. Talking of the developed world, we are hypocritical because we sit here and we have the outcries, but when it comes down to it, we say, you know what? I rather borrow the money, build my house, and put the swimming pool back in so we can just have the barbecue than suffer, what people call suffering, than to suffer and take my family and park my family instead of in front of the mayor's house and say, what do I do now? That house that I used to live in that I paid off is gone and I have to restart all over. That's on you. Pay me. So instead of the whole city doing that, the whole city said, well, you know what, let me quickly go to the bank and get the first loan because they may run out of money or they may not give it out anymore or it may not be at this rate anymore. Let me just rush to it because I have become a capitalist as well. And that being the case, we're just hypocritical. We have no collective effort. So that is the first point on the developed world, and I think the consumer hypocrisy is driving the damage. Now, shifting that onto the developing world, when I left my life in North America and Canada and left behind all of that 1% life, I traveled through the world, and for the first time, being for the first time that I traveled without the luxuries that I'm used to in the developing world, I saw a different side of it. and I saw a different side of this world. And I saw the true inequalities and the slavery and the corruption and many aspects of the developing world. Now, when we discuss the developing nations, how do you see it being a part of this whole trouble? Because there are things like tree planting initiatives and these fun kind of issues that they bring up, assuming here I'm going to take my private jet around the world and I'm going to plant 2,000 trees, so everything should be fine, everything's okay. There's no emissions now because I've planted those trees, supposedly even. But sustainable farming, resource management, especially water. How do you see that part of the world that truly is enslaved to the money of the developed world and has not much say to be able to eat at the end of the day, because of the way that they're tied into the system, the capitalist system? How do we break that inequality to allow them to come out of that? And taking into consideration that a lot of people wrongfully attach carbon issues to this part of the world. And when you look at the numbers, they really aren't producers of that much carbon emission. And what they do produce is destined to the developed world. So really, if the demand of the products that they produce for the developed world was not there, you can even slash their output by maybe 75 to 80%. So where do we go from here with them?
Well, I think that I totally agree with you. And actually, that's one of the reasons why we tend to focus much more on biodiversity and regenerative agriculture as solutions. It's been very hard to get the investment community interested in that space because they don't see any unicorns and they're just chasing unicorns. So they put 30, 40 billion into climate tech funds or direct deals that are not going to do anything because they're trying to use a technological solution of drawing down megatons when we need to get gigatons, which is what biodiversity can offer that. And if you do regenerative agriculture, reforestation, avoided deforestation, community development, and things like that, you can have a tremendous impact. And everyone forgets that the two largest employers in the world are not AI, are not tech. It's small-scale agriculture, 1.3 billion, and hospitality, which is 330 million working there. And so I agree with you. I think the focus must be much, much more on biodiversity, and despite the fact that most investors aren't interested in it. But I'm quite confident that going forward, because the demand for offset, not only reducing the CO2 emissions, but trying to offset that through verifiable, accurate, correct, large-scale biodiversity credits will grow significantly. And that is a relatively easy fix. It's not nuclear fusion at room temperature. It's just not going to give you the mega returns that everyone seems to be looking for. But we already got, 5 times more money 5 times more wealth than we have GDP. So we'll manage, without having unicorns for a while. So I'm a big fan of regenerative agriculture, and anybody who's actually interested in that as a way of carbon drawdown, you should look up Professor Ratan Lal, who's a brilliant soil scientist and just a brilliant thinker, professor at Ohio State University, a very humble guy. And he talks of 330 gigaton potential. We're doing 35 gigatons a year that we're pushing out. So if you can get to that scale, that could give us specifically the time for the transition. What is clear to me from the financial crisis and from the COVID crisis is that people can move quickly when they want to. We always heard, I'm sorry, there's no budget, there's no money, the world came out with mountains of tsunami of money for the financial sector. There's no money. And then all the money for the vaccination process and compensating companies while they were not in business. So the money is there. It's a question of when government or when individuals want to move quickly, they can. And until now, they just have not moved quickly because they're comfortable. I mean, believe it or not, I used to work on oil rigs. I worked in Iran, in the North Sea, in France, in Texas. So I know what it is to make a hole in the ground. And people who work in that space, in the fossil fuel energy business, it's very easy for them to do this, open up the pipeline and make more money. But who is better equipped to retool the whole energy system to a fuel-free energy but the oil and gas sector, because they're used to making big infrastructure. You want to build 50,000 windmills in Tornado Alley. Yeah, don't hire Harry and his team of 3. Hire BP. But they're comfortable with making their bonuses and making the money, and they're not paying for the CO2. So as long as people are comfortable, there's not going to be a big push. It's really about, you really have to try to encourage those passionate individuals that feel we need to fix this, and we need to take care of each other, and we need to take care of planet Earth, because, I mean, we'll die, we'll all phase away, but the Earth will, plants will come back, life will come back, but we'll be fucked.
Yes.
And that's fine. You made the mess, you pay the penalty. But if you do care about the future, if you do care about, dying rich is not an accomplishment, and having more money than God, but you can't breathe the air, that's really not a world that I would want to live in. And we can do something about it, but we need to shift priorities and need to get away from this obsession of just chasing unicorns. And let's be honest. I mean, what was it, 3-4 years ago, Larry Fink was the hero of sustainable investment, constantly talking about ESG. And now he gets pushed back by a couple of states with idiot governors in Florida and Texas. ESG is now a dirty word. Maybe we shouldn't push it, and maybe still do more in fossil. So people need to call out and speak the radical truth. And, as Yoda used to say, do or do not, there's no try. And unfortunately, the ones doing a lot in trying to restore the social environmental balance talk the least. And the ones that do the least, they talk the most. So people believe the press releases. Media is too polite to these people. They don't call them out. You see it at conferences that have lots of sponsors. More sponsors, no critical thought. That's why we don't take any sponsorship for any of our events. I never wanted that, because they're going to start demanding, hey, I want to talk about it. Yeah, but you're not doing anything. If you want to support us, buy some tickets, give it to people, but you're not doing anything. So, and I don't want to be beholding, because most of them run their events like North Korean show trials where you can't say anything. So people need to make a serious commitment, and we need to look at things that are doable and simple, like regenerative agriculture, like biodiversity, like reducing too much animal protein consumption. I'm not saying everybody has to be vegan. I hate the taste of vegan cheese. It's awful. It's terrible. If you don't like cheese, eat vegan cheese. It's just awful. And it's also very, all of this, precision fermentation is very energy intensive. Mm-hmm. Letting animals graze or having a farm outside, you get all the energy for free. where precision fermentation had lots of waste and a lot of energy use for that. So if you look at the whole life cycle thing, you're not really moving the needle of. So I think that we can definitely do better. I think that you're seeing signs of situation slowly getting better, but unfortunately it's got to get really much worse before people realize we have to do something. The pain is not big enough yet. We have a little bit of it. Okay, it's hot. You know, it's 121 degrees in Death Valley, or it's been over 100 degrees in Arizona. Yeah, so they'll sit inside in the air conditioning and run it up higher. We're not really suffering yet. And unfortunately, I'm afraid that people only respond when the pain is great enough, and that pain is not great enough yet.
True. And I've heard somebody else refer to the same issue using a toothache. And they say, you know, sometimes I get this little sharp pain in my tooth. It's very, very quick. It's a split of a second. It comes and goes. I'm not going to go to the dentist for that because I have better things to do. I have to go out to dinner. I have to go watch a movie. So I weigh the balance of what gives me more pleasure. But when the night comes that I did not sleep all night because of my toothache and I am almost in tears, I will go to the dentist in the morning, no matter what is waiting for me pleasurably in the morning. So that responds to exactly what you say. And from all that you said, I will take a couple of points of hypocrisy again. And I will say the first of it is, as you rightfully say, governments and the trade balance of the developed and the developing world is not implemented in a way that allows the developing world the rights to produce in a sustainable fashion. And we turn a blind eye to the criminality of it because I'll give you an example to really get into that. The book publishing industry, approximately 90% of all paper produced, it comes from a certain point of illegal either manufacturing or tree logging. So to think that one is holding a book that they are reading or a document or even a court document or a hospital paper or anything that is printed on paper comes from a fully sustainable, a fully fair kind of trade balance is a hypocrisy in itself. And yet we commit to that. And a lot of, like you said, a lot of media bow down to the powerful publishing houses and the powerful paper companies in the sense that I've seen so many reports and so many big media publish the trade-off between print and an e-reader. And then they take into consideration the manufacturing costs of the e-reader in terms of the carbon footprint of one e-reader coming to your doorstep. And they take that of one book and they say, well, you'd have to read 35 books on this e-reader to balance out and that kind of story. But they don't take into consideration that, you know what, I have a phone, I have a laptop, I have a tablet probably, I have other tech that I'm using for other purposes. I'm just going to read the ebook here, and I'm not going to put through all of the slavery that goes on into binding the book in a developing world and all of the tree logging illegally in the Amazon or Indonesia or anywhere else that it happens, which happens at such a high rate that, again, it's not Harry and his 3 employees who are picking up the trees and making paper out of it. It's big companies that can afford to take that amount of tree. So there is a hypocrisy in the sense that we turn a blind eye and then we turn around and we blame the corruption or the whatever it may be, even human rights issues of developing countries. Just recently, the United States government was criticizing human rights issues in Afghanistan, while that was the same country that just walked out of Afghanistan. So if you walked out and gave it back to them, don't criticize after you've made your money essentially and walked out. So in a sense, there's a lot of hypocrisy in the trade of how we view and how we support and how we actually value humanity, in the sense that, again, we saw this through the pandemic. A life in one country is not equivalent to a life in another country. And if we don't balance that, we cannot look further than the money that we hope to make out of everybody. The second point that I wanted to take from what you said was the fact that we can make a difference, we can change, we can adjust, we can include these giants of the industry to be the change makers, but we need some kind of powerful or radical shift. As an example, the cigarette industry, the smoking industry. In the 70s and 80s, they were giants. They were some of the biggest corporations around. With stringent laws, regulations, and health scares and worries, and the cost of all the damages that were coming, we implemented certain reforms. And through these reforms, the investors of these companies realized this is a dying industry. They took their funds, instead of placing them on massive lobbying, they just let it fizzle away. They took their funds and they invested it in the next global industry that would happen. And so they shifted, and that industry blew up. And so now I think it's time to force and put the pressure on our governments to be able to implement these reforms, so that the same investors walk away from BP, or walk away, or BP itself removes its funds from continuing in this path because there is no more demand for its product, and implementing the funds and the infrastructure and the tech and the organizational skills that they have, as you said, on a giant scale beyond much any other industry in the world, to implement new sustainable ways of living and surviving this crisis. So again, that hypocrisy is the hypocrisy of the organizations to willingly want to shift, and the governments to willingly want to place that issue there, which brings us to a totality. And I think the totality of it, as I always say, is a spiritual issue. The spiritual issue being the capitalism of the environmentalist movement. And you brought up veganism. And if anybody follows the stocks of some of the major vegan brands, they'll notice they skyrocketed at one point, and then they dropped, and they dropped really badly. And the reason they dropped is because it was a capitalist implementation. The reason these brands were developed and formed and produced and all of that is because of money. And how you see this is in that graph. If it was a belief system, and if it was a spiritual system, in the sense that I am protesting eating meat because of the effects on the environment, because of the harms to the animals in the manners that they're being farmed and treated, and because of true values that I stand by and core values that I stand by, then it would have sustained and it would have continued. But because it became a fad to have an Impossible Burger at one point, and it was an expensive burger in many of the restaurants, it died just as the fashion came and the fashion went. There was no implementation of tangible byproducts from that. The industry did not implement into anything. I would assume if you are a giant of the industry and you are showing revenues in the hundreds of millions, that you would take some of that money and you would start buying out the meat farms and start helping restructure and fix the problem of the troubles that animals are going through. But nothing like that happened. So again, there is a hypocrisy there. So it all comes down to the capitalism of it. So again, here in the environmental space, we are really just interested, as you said, in the noise we can make to profit from the noise, and not really the actual waging of the war to go ahead and make the difference. Because making the difference, we're too scared to start or impact the revolution because we're worried that we may not be Moses and be Jesus instead. And people look at that at the moment. So Moses went in with the staff, freed the Israelites, took them away, crossed the Red Sea, and everything was gorgeous. Everybody wants to be Moses in the story. But nobody wants to be Jesus. Nobody wants to be flogged and have a non-violent, silent protest and sit there and go through everything that he went through to create a future based on compassion and love. We want the glory of it. And because there may not be a guaranteed glory in the revolution, we may, rile people up and end up like Donald Trump. It just, people don't want to do that because they have the comfortable life. They have the comfort of doing the TEDx's and all these other things that end up with no value at the end of the day in terms of the impact. And if anything, it's causing problems because people had to make it there. So people had to show up there. And again, the sponsorship issue. We're in the same position at Compassiviste. We don't have sponsors. And the reason we don't have sponsors is I've been approached by certain sponsors. And when I look at the way the money is being made to allow Compassiviste to grow, I'm going to be fighting the same issue that is paying me. So if I just don't take the money and don't fight it, I'm already an activist in the process because by doing nothing, I have not used funds that are coming and predestined from these sources. So again, it comes down to smart money and people who are willing to unite and come together and put their funds and their hours and their time and their effort and their education and knowledge and really bring their soul to the table and say, we want to make a change. Let's band together and make that change. So how do the question now becomes, if you were placed as a global leader for making this immediate radical change, if let's imagine that hypothetical situation, because really this isn't a national issue. I mean, we can tomorrow, the United States can say, that's it, we're done, we're going to change everything, and we're going to be truly at a reversal point in our carbon emissions. But if Brazil doesn't act along and if India doesn't act along, it's useless at that point. So this is a global issue. It's not a nation by nation. We could implement it nationally, but we need some kind of global structure that brings them together, and obviously not through the UN, because we've seen what that's done over the last many decades. So if you had that power, what would Robert Rubinstein say?
Well, I take a different tack because everybody loves EVs, electric vehicles, as a replacement for ICEs, internal combustion engine. I hate them. I think that they're the worst investments out there because if you look at all of the stuff, the mining, the cobalt, the lithium, the steel, everything to make a car, and when you look at how many hours a day does a car actually move? Very few, maybe 20 hours a day it's parked. Okay, if everybody in an electric vehicle, we might be able to have that battery storage, but we're nowhere near that. So it's basically a luxury item for people to show off. And if you look at the distances that they drive, average of 40 kilometers a day. In the US, half the travel is 5 kilometers a day because they're too goddamn lazy to walk to the bakery because they live out in the suburbs. So you're spending all of that money, tens of billions of dollars, to create a vehicle that is parked most of the time, not utilized very much. A small percentage of that going into public transport or car on demand as a kind of in between an Uber car and a van that picks you up and takes you over there, and it's very cheap. And if you want to do it electric, super, but you're not spending all of this billions for a car that's parked all the time. and you're not having to build, all of these ridiculous mega factories. It's just nonsensical. Get a bike. The distances you have to go are very short. Walk, take public transit, put the money in public transport, put the money in high-speed rail. It's so much better. We shouldn't even be paying for public transport. The same thing with broadband. I mean, the extra cost for having a little bit more access with broadband is nothing. Offering free broadband to everyone would have a dramatic impact on their lives. So there's lots and lots of stuff that we can do that benefits everyone. Unfortunately, decisions seem to be taken more and more that benefit a very small group. In the US, it's even worse because there the best investment is lobbying. At least in the EU, it seems that most decisions are made for how can we impact positively a greater group. So we need to do things that are beneficial to the whole, because having all of the money and all the power and influence, and everybody's coming after you with pitchforks and torches to take you down, you're not going to be able to have enough physical protection. That's why people like Musk are so busy trying to get to Mars, because they want to get the hell out of here, because they know that this is crazy. Water should. We need to restore the biosphere. We need to have a sensibility that creating an economy based on well-being benefits all. There needs to be a universal basic income, because we're just not, with AI, we're not going to be able to have jobs for every single person. We're not for the, 5 days a week. And if inflation at this, people will have to work a lot. So you're going to have to find ways. And we can afford that. We can. The money is there. And it's just a shift in priority. But you're right. The driver is capitalism and investment. How do we keep getting money? I look around in Amsterdam and I saw all of these Dunkin' Donuts stores that were popped up out of and Baskin and Robbins, because it's the same company that does that. And because they raise money through an IPO or a bond or whatever, so they have to generate this gasoline fire. So let's just open up these sugar stores that, keep to give the returns to the investor. That model, that gasoline fire, is just not is not a healthy society, because the transition that we need is not being done fast enough, because nobody wants to write off the investment they have. In the UK, there's a guy who's sitting on the solution for cement. Cement's very polluting. A ton of cement, maybe a ton of CO2 or 700 kilos. So there's a Frenchman who developed a cement that has no CO2 emissions. Zero. It doesn't burn. You can put it in tunnels. You can use salt water instead of fresh water. It uses fly ash and slag, waste material. So you think, great, let's shift. So I'm Lafarge, you're my banker. Ali, I'm going to get rid of all our CO2 emissions. So I need you to write down $10 billion in loans that you've given me over the years. And I need you to give me another $3 billion for the new plants, because we're going to have to shut down the quarries and go to the steel mills and the coal-fired power plants to be close to that. So, of course, you say, hell no, I'm not doing that. It's my bonus. I'm not giving that away. So we have lots of stranded assets like that, and we have this obsession of constant more and more and more returns. So we keep, let's just put out more and more electric vehicles. Yes, it might be better than the gasoline, but we don't need that many cars. We don't need to build them. We need more public transport. Most people live in cities anyway. We need much more affordable public transport for people. Cars parked all the time. What is the point of that? All that infrastructure for them, all the insurance, all the accidents. It's just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. Yes, but people are so proud. Wow, I have a Tesla. So? Yeah. So what?
And that brings us to environmental activism as the solution. But before we get into that, name the Frenchman that you just mentioned.
Davidovitz.
Okay, so
His
everybody
name
can
is
know.
Joseph Davidovitz.
There
And
we
if you
go.
go to geopolymer.org, he has loads of
solution.
open source research.
Right.
And the cement industry used to buy patents from him, but then they'd sit on it and they
Yes.
say, okay, I'm done. I'm not going to sell you patents.
I know. I'm well aware of that.
Yeah,
boycotted
brilliant guy, but until now, no major geopolymer plant has been built. A variation of it was used during Desert Storm because they only had to move half the cement, half the water, and they dried very fast and was strong.
And so taking this as an example, when you talked about Lafarge and banking, I think a solution of it is to forget as people, as the average people, as the 99%, to forget the matters of the capitalist structure and to come together and say, okay, if we demand that our cement in our buildings that we're willing to purchase or our buildings that we're willing to rent must be of this caliber, then at some point, this change has to occur. Now, at some point, somebody has to take a loss to make this happen, or there can be some kind of offset. There can be some kind of subsidization of this transference of technology. So instead of saying the bank must take the hit or, Lafarge must take the hit and do it in that way, which from their perspective looks like you are throwing them under the bus, and they've worked really hard to get to where they are as that bank, the giant in the banking industry or the giant in the cement industry. But instead of doing that, to forgive all of the capitalism and say, we will all share the cost together. We will all share the costs because we need to. Because I'd rather share 50 cents of my dollar so that I can see tomorrow than die with my dollar in my pocket in a fire because I couldn't escape the wildfire. So if there's a solution at the end of the day, I'm willing to suffer through and forgive and work with whoever it may be to get me across alive. And that's the point here, because a lot of people mistake environmentalism for saving the trees or saving the forest or any of that. And that's just bad science, because when we're gone and industries shut down, it will take a very short period in that universal aging for the planet to be green and lush again. And it'll take a very short period for a lot of animals to bounce back again. But it will take a long time for maybe humans to flourish again. So it isn't an environmental issue about the rainforest. It really is an environmental issue of, if we destroy the rainforest, we destroy ourselves. People need to get that. And that brings us to environmental activism. I think from everything that you say, the only solution is to empower the environmental activism to a point where it has the financial capacity, the structural capacity, the infrastructure to be able to make that impactful change. And you see that, for example, let's just say in London, Just Stop Oil. Just Stop Oil is making a lot of noise. They're disrupting a lot. And a lot of people are complaining. They say, oh, I'm on my way to work and these people are disrupting my way to work. And I say to them, well, you know what? In a few years, you will have no work to go to. So what difference does it really make if nobody's contributing to what they're trying to raise the alarm on? But they don't have the infrastructure or the financial capacity to be able to impact change. So they beg and plead and protest that we should stop using oil. We should stop giving new licenses out. But they do not have the capacity to enforce those decisions, not even by lobbying, not even by advocating powerfully enough so people back them up, not even by allowing subsidizations through their mechanisms. So I suggest activism to be such that the world comes together and puts up those billions of dollars that we need as individuals to override those systems, in a sense. Why depend on the bank and Lafarge striking a deal and seeing how they can screw us at the end of the day to pay that off and dump it on us while they still take their bonuses? I mean, we saw it in the financial collapse of 2008. A lot of bank managers still got their bonuses, but people were losing their homes. It didn't make sense, but that's how it is. So why expect them to be any different? Instead, why don't we raise the capital, the smart capital ourselves, and put it together to reach a point where we can impact that decision-making structure? What do you say to that?
Well, I like that. I was listening to a podcast today that I put the link over here of a very interesting woman named Rose Abramoff, and she's the director of the climate, the climate emergency fund. So they fund all of the institutions you were talking about for environmental action. So disruption, demonstrations, activism, they fund all of that. I mean, all of it. They give money to support that. And she was talking about, she gave a podcast about nonviolence engagement to, so you're right. I think, as that movie of, Howard Beale, stick your head out, I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore. But unfortunately, people still want to be part of the cool kids. They want to hang out with the influencers. They want to be able, the media wants to have access to the politicians. So they don't really give them a hard time. There's not really the pushback, that we need. And people need to realize it's not about losing something. It's not about sacrifice. It's about resilience. This society, the way it's run this way, is not benefiting most life. It's not in service of life. It's not supporting most individuals. The teachers have to struggle to be able to get by, or doctors and nurses have to struggle to get by. Years ago, I had a heart operation. I had a heart valve put in because I got very sick. I got endocarditis, and I had the valve put in. And I was amazed that even though they weren't paid very well, how all of the people were doing their best to make me better, to get me better. And they loved their job. I said, and wow, and they're really compensated poorly. And a 20-year-old kid with pimples in front of a screen is getting 400,000 pounds a year for moving this here, because my friend in the other building told me, oh, this one is in play now. So our priorities are really screwed up. Our priorities are really, really screwed up. And people need to speak their mind, and don't take things for granted that what people say to you, particularly those in the financial sector. They're just trying to make their fees. Mm-hmm. And they're not working in the service of life. Most of them are not. Some are, but not enough. So as long as this system is running this way, you're going to see more activism. You're going to see more demonstration. You're going to see more, unhappiness. Why is a nutcase like Donald Trump is so popular? Well, it's very simple. Education in the United States is funded by local property taxes. You live in a rich community, you got good schools. You live in a poor community, you got bad schools. Throw in the mix that the country was started by religious fanatics and criminals, and then add to that Fox News as a source of stirring up the pot. Yeah, that's what you get. He's just a reflection of what is there. So it's not that he created that. He's just the reflection of what's there. So it was always a violent, racist country. In all of these years, they still, with all of these mass shootings, they still can't get their act together. And I heard a shocking news yesterday that John Dingell, who was a black progressive Democrat who fought for universal health care, education. He was one of the major causes why the NRA became so powerful, because he was a gun nut and he told them how to win over. And they didn't want to be so aggressive in that. He said, no, you got to be more aggressive. You got to make the policy in that. So here's a guy who we thought was on the left, and he just puts things through, and you have a situation where any schmuck can get a gun, but you have to really work to try to get a driver's license or vote.
Yeah,
So
the values are definitely upside down in a lot of places.
It's crazy. So people need to think, what society do you want? If you're happy with things I'm not going to get you excited. I'm not going to get you to stick your head out and start screaming. I'm not going to get you to take action, either not buying certain product or not investing or not, I used to tell students, and I taught MBA students at the Rodham School of Management, and they say, we're really keen on impact and sustainability. I said, well, okay, you want to do something very simple. When the recruiter comes to recruit you, you turn it around and you interview the recruiter. And if that recruiter doesn't align with your values, refuse to work there. But tell them that. Because if you're a ranked MBA student and these recruiters come for you, you have leverage then. If enough of you say, I don't want to work for you, then that will go back to the board to say, the students we want are not excited about a red BMW. Unfortunately, nearly all of the students that I taught in those 4 years, none of them did that. None of them. They were all afraid of their student loans. And because when you work at a company, and if it's a big company, you have no power to change anything. But if you refuse, if you're at a ranked MBA, you have leverage then. Use it. These are little simple things collectively can change the order. It's not big. I'm not asking people to do big things. You don't have to climb Mount Everest barefoot. Little things. It's about little wins.
Right. And that's what it's all about. It's about activism from a small start, like you said, little things, all the way to big things. And it's about the impact of these truly sustainable practices that we can incorporate in our daily lives, and through the protest that we can incorporate through resilience, as you say, and the willpower, the sheer willpower. Because if capitalism's taught us one thing, it's willpower and determination and dedication and effort provides results. And we just need to capitalize, but not from a financial perspective. We need to change the structure of capitalism to a value of compassion through activism, so that we can reach an end point where humanity survives and humanity can be harmonious and humanity can coexist on the planet, and humanity can focus on all the beautiful things that we're blessed with. Whether it's, you look at this from a religious, secular, spiritual perspective, I mean, music, art, culinary experiences, all these things are just, such beautiful things that we have access to and we can experience if we just shift our mind state from money to compassion, to love, to the ability to be happy in that way. And I really thank you for being on this episode and sharing with us your thoughts to a greener future and raising the hypocrisy points. A lot of people don't do what you're doing. And I really want to thank people like yourself who come out day in and day out in your own space, in other spaces that I've seen you, and stand for what you believe in, and not shy away from speaking the truth, as you say, and who go out and verify what they hear. You're not just sitting there swallowing what the media gives you and saying, okay, this is what it's going to be. You're the critic. You're the person who asks the questions. You're the person who says, this is what we need to do. And I can attest right here that throughout my journey, you've been impactful in really providing support. What you've been able to support with, you have done. And that is something we need more of in the world. We need more of your type of compassion, of your type of support, of your type of presentation of truth, so that people can be less fearful and frightened of their own individual space and impact, and more optimistic of how we can come together, bond, and make the change that is necessary for us to proceed. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank
And
you.
I
That's
hope
very kind
everybody
of you to
listens
say
to
that.
this and enjoys this, and really, looks at your spaces, the TBLI group, and joins. I'm a member there, and there's a whole lot of amazing people there. And we just need more spaces like this, more genuine spaces like yours, and like Compassiviste, that is trying to activate the world and bring those spaces together, so that we can be the influence with the right amount of capital, with the right amount of social input, with the right amount of people and membership in our movements. I think we can take the concepts of, say, Just Stop Oil's nonviolent advocacy and activism, add to it something like Extinction Rebellion's ideology, and with the proper guidance and with the proper funding on a global level, there is not much standing in the way of us plowing through the gates of hypocrisy and capitalism. So
I agree.
on that note, a toast to fighting this and the revolution, and we will talk soon.
All right. Thank you so much for this opportunity and for those kind words, Ali. If we can help you in any way, let me know.
You're always helpful. Thank you.